the home run is when it's a communal experience. It's part of being a community. And then eventually the special sauce at this track is that experience is passed on from generation to generation, which is golden.
Welcome back to Innovate or Evaporate, where we explore the relentless pace of change and the innovators who drive it. I'm your host, Toph Day. What do Fidel Castro, John McEnroe, and Roger Penske all have in common? They have all sat across the table from the man joining us today. In the world of global sports, there are people who talk about big events, and then there's the person you call when the event is too big, too complex, or too risky for anyone else to handle. Our guest today is the ultimate logistical strategist. He's the person who took a city's secret sauce of volunteerism and turned it into a billion-dollar international spectacle. He's the leader who moved the needle for professional tennis when it was struggling to compete, and the visionary who helped turn a Midwestern city into a global destination for the NFL's biggest game. Today, we're going to go behind the curtain of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and IndyCar to learn how you transform a 100-year-old brand in a digital world moving faster than ever. Mark Miles, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Great to be here.
I am so excited. Your journey is absolutely amazing, doing big things. And when we think about the podcast show name, Innovate or Evaporate, one thing you have done time and time again is innovate. So I want to start off in 1976, I think it was. You graduated from Wabash. And so no doubt you knew exactly what you were going to do the rest of your life. So I want to start there. So you were a campaign manager, right? With, I think, Lugar and maybe Dan Quayle on different various campaigns. Let's just start with step one. How do you get from college to working on campaigns at the national level?
Actually, I did it during college. In 1974, I had a summer job my dad had helped me get. Not that any amount of work was a problem. I'd been a hod carrier on construction sites and painted and cut grass. But this job was at Eli Lilly, where he had made his career. And it was in the liquid and ointment manufacturing facility. So we were cleaning out the vats to move from making this ointment to this one and doing the floors and all the rest of it, which was fine, except I was bored to tears. Just, you want to have a reason to want to go to work in the morning. And I got introduced to this guy named Mitch Daniels. My sister and his sister were good buddies. He was then out of Princeton and was kind of number two on Mayor Lugar's campaign for the U.S. Senate. And I said, if you give me something interesting to do, you don't even have to pay me. I can give tennis lessons at night. And so I ended up working for Mitch in that Senate campaign, which was impossible to win. It was the first election year after Watergate. So Republicans were hopeless.
It's going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah, it was not going to happen. So I did that. Then I went back and finished. And then I got involved in a couple other campaigns. I never ran Mayor Lugar's campaign, although I worked closely with him through Mitch. But I ran Bill Hudnut's campaign for mayor, his first reelection campaign.
Yep. And
then Dan Quayle's campaign for the Senate. So those things just kept popping up, and each one was a little more challenging and exciting, and I kept saying yes.
So that's interesting. So that makes me think that it was opportunistic at the beginning, and back to this word we use a lot about relationships, right? So it sounds like you were young, you were curious, and a friend of yours has these connections, and so all of a sudden you're into that business. And was that, so you started that in late high school into college?
No, I was halfway through college.
When that started. And so so those were probably like 24/7 days.
That's what I loved about it. It wasn't really the policy orientation of public service. It was campaigns, which, you start on one day. Yep. And on some date certain in the future, you're going to know how you did. You're going to win or lose on election night. And there's no end to what you can do. So very much 24/7, but in the midst of lots of talented, sort of high energy people. And so I just love the organizational challenge of campaigns.
One of the things I talked to my son about is he's a senior in high school now. And so Eric Holcomb, when he went to the Navy and he came back, he was a driver. I can't remember for which representative it was. But in life, you as you progress, sometimes you take a reset, right, in order to get to the destination. Were there some folks that you met back then on the campaign that in your professional life came into your professional life 10 and 20 and 30 years later? Is there any?
Oh, all the time. I was just doing it because it was really invigorating and fun. At the time, I didn't know the word network or mentor. Looking back on it all these years later, I feel like campaign for young persons like leadership boot camp.
Yeah.
Because the more you do in a campaign, the more you have to figure, and nobody teaches you how to do any of it. There's no training.
Sink or swim.
Yeah. So you just learn how to try to get things done. And that was a big part of the reason I did it. Having said that, and not knowing or thinking I'm networking, you're just doing stuff, right? So if you have to raise money, for example, for a mayoral campaign, you end up knowing everybody in town that is at least persuadable to your candidate's point of view. With Bill Hudnut, that wasn't very hard. And people who run businesses and people who make a difference in their business or the community. So you're done, or you're in the next one, and you don't just know people. You don't just have their contacts or a Rolodex in those days. You really have a relationship with them, and you've done things together, and it's the deepest form of relationship. So I thought, after the fact, not intentionally at the time, that campaigns were a tremendous kind of foundation for what I ended up doing later.
Yeah, and building these deep levels of trust.
You hope so.
Yeah, true. So then in 1987, you had 30 months to pull off the Pan Am Games. So help bridge the gap between the campaigns you were working on, and when did that end? What did you do in between before the Pan Am Games?
So after managing Dan Quayle's campaign for the Senate, I went to D.C. as his chief of staff briefly. I didn't even want to do it because I didn't want to work for the government. I loved campaigns, but went out there for a while, and that was a phenomenal experience. And came back and started a direct marketing company. We started a little agency. It didn't require much capital. I'd learned a lot about that for fundraising purposes and campaigns. And then I got involved as a volunteer in the very early days of the Indiana Sports Corporation with a national sports festival. And then we sold the company, and we're waiting for the deal to close. Jim Morris and Ted Boehm were very close, and they were close to the guy I'd done the agency with, Tom Moses, who was a real civic leader. And they said they'd just been contacted by the U.S. Olympic Committee. The USOC said Indianapolis that they had the chance to go see if they could get the Pan American Games, to submit a bid and be part of that process. And so the local guys came to me and said, why don't you help us put the bid together? So now I'm a volunteer putting a bid together. I have no idea what a bid is, but it was a chance to put the community's best foot forward and think about how that could happen. And then we went down to Mexico City and we got it. We got elected or selected over Havana, Cuba, and then all hell broke loose. But that was the process, and that's how I got involved. But the other thing I should say is, whether you were a Republican or a Democrat didn't matter. In the late 70s, the early days of the sports movement in Indy, and I think it's still true, sports was being seen as an economic development initiative, a community building initiative. And so people just wanted to be part of it, and it wasn't a partisan thing at all. But of course, I knew a lot of people by then that through my political work.
So just a funny, quick story. I remember, so I was a little bit of a youngster then, and I was a card holder at the Pan Am Games. And so your outreach, it reached Buck Creek, Indiana, the little farm where I grew up. And my mom brought me and my siblings down to the Pan Am Games, and we were card holders.
I love hearing that story. And it is so, we ended up with 38,000 supposedly uniformed, credentialed, trained volunteers, an army of people that wanted to be part of that and did really important stuff to make it happen. And I left town years later for 15 years, and I came back, and you'd get stopped on the street by a little old lady that said, I was the assistant deputy awards presenter for the water polo.
Yeah.
And it was the most important thing I ever did. And I don't mean that in any way to mock it. People remember what they do when they get involved in something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely.
And sports was always that. And it's all these years later, people remember it fondly.
So now you had to do some big negotiations, right, to get Cuba to play, to come and participate in the games? How did that?
Well, we competed against Cuba to get the right to host the games. I don't remember exactly. It was late, 84. But it seemed like the day we got it, Castro announced they were boycotting, and Cuba wasn't going to play. which was horrendous on lots of levels. To think about it kind of commercially, that was still very much the Cold War. And so, the Cubans coming to the heartland of America, along with radicals, if you will, from Nicaragua and El Salvador, that was kind of the tension in it. They also were superb athletes. And so on the field, in the competition, it was just pivotally important that they were part of it. So, yeah, we learned somehow that he was out, and it's too long a story probably, but we end up spending like 3 different 3-hour sessions with Castro in his offices in Cuba. The first one was to start down the path of figuring out if they could be convinced to come in. And he's kind of laid out the conditions where, without saying it quite so clearly, where they would compete. We got almost all of that done. And the second one was to go down there, and we believed we were going to hear they were in. So we took a whole lot of media with us for that trip. And then the third one was well after the games. Indianapolis was trying to get the World Baseball Championship, and the Sports Corp asked me to kind of help make the pitch for that. And the Congress that was going to decide that was in Cuba. So it's like 1 a.m. for the third time, and I'm ready to go home the next day, and there's a knock on the door, and he just wanted to reminisce about the games in Indianapolis. So
that's amazing.
The first 2 were substantive. The third one was harder to explain.
So are there 1 or 2 things that you recall from a strategy standpoint on how to convince them to participate that you guys
first of all, it's so important to their athletes to be able to to compete on an international stage. So they wanted to, and they had great athletes. So that the motivation was there. Really, in our first meeting, very kind of obtuse. Well, he spoke for like 2 hours and 40 minutes to 5 of us at 1 a.m. But he kind of laid out the conditions. And as I recall, they were something like, 1, we have to get the right to host the next one. Well, that wasn't our decision.
Right.
And it wasn't even a decision that was supposed to be made until after our games.
Right.
But we have to know that. 2, in those days, and for all I know today still, if planes were flying from Cuba to Indianapolis, for example, then they had to stop in Miami, and American security people got in the cockpit of the Cuban plane to avoid overflights over sensitive installations. So he wanted to know that there'd be none of that. They'd fly straight from Havana to Indianapolis. 3, they had to have the games on television so the Cuban people could watch their athletes. And I remember him saying, we'll pay you for the rights, but your government won't let you take the monies. All we just need to know, with or without payment, it's on television. And then 4th, there was this really unclear statement that was pretty clearly meant to say that he wanted to come and he wanted to be part of the closing ceremony, which is part of the Olympic protocol in a sense. So we kind of said, okay, so if we do this and this and this and this, you're in, right? And then we went away for months, and we had Mitch Daniels in the West Wing of the White House, and Reagan and Quayle and Lugar and people all over the Hill that were very importantly positioned. And we got 3 of those 4 things done. The 4th one, our country wasn't going to have any part of. It was possible to communicate that, and we got the invitation to come back down and talk about it, which was code for that's good enough. And it was huge. It would have been an entirely different event, and its impact would have been very different had the Cuban athletes not participated.
So for our listeners out there that are planning something that's major in their lives, right? It might be going for that massive enterprise deal. Their company might have risen to a level, and now they're going for a massive enterprise deal. But any things from a strategy, from a planning standpoint, on how to maybe think about sometimes deals are closed before you walk into the room. Maybe a lot of times on the
I don't remember those.
Right. So like, what would be the one big takeaway for folks out there listening to this that when they're planning in advance of some major deal, does anything pop out on recommendations on the work before the work?
It's do your homework, right? It's you always want to walk in the room being meaningfully better prepared than anybody else in the room. Not for ego, right? But just to be able to catch any curveball and get the job done. I'll say this, though, about a slightly different question, which is, how to make something like that successful. I think you have to think really big.
Yep.
You have to take an idea and blow it up to its maximum potential while still having a good sense of what's doable. Because you can come up with all kind of fantasy and nothing happens as hoped, and that's disheartening for the people trying to pull something off. So for us, it was, and look, I was very young. I'm absorbing these lessons at the time.
When you went and met with him the first time, how old were you?
I was 33. In fact, it's a funny story. I knew we thought we were going to be meeting with him, so I read everything I could get my hands on for weeks about him. And one of the things I read was, about the revolution. And so we get called at 1 a.m. from our Cuba Libre hotel, get in the car, Russian car, take us to the palace, drive under, go in an elevator, go sit in a holding room for a while, and then they say, let's go. So there were 3 older people than me in our group, and I was the last one in, and you turn the corner into his office from this hallway, and there he is in the uniform, the hat, barrel-chested, and I saw him greet the others in front of me, and then it was my turn, and he said, through an interpreter, "You're very young to have this responsibility." And I said, "Actually, you were 3 months younger when you won the revolution and took Havana."
That is amazing.
Lit him up. It
Right.
was, yeah, who knows if you're going to get shot or if it's going to appeal. But do your homework. Big part of it.
Yeah, that probably swelled him up with a lot of pride, I'm sure.
I'm sure it didn't make a bit of difference to him, but at least he knew we were serious.
That was loosening him up a little bit.
Yeah.
So the Pan Am Games happen, and they're highly successful. Then you went to the ATP.
Yeah.
Right? And so how did that happen? How did that phone call come in? You were a college player in tennis?
Yeah, and the very limited relevance of that. I was getting paid to do the Pan American Games, and the same people, Jim Morris in particular, who was then president of Lilly Endowment, and I met, and we'd gotten to know each other well through that work. And he said, the endowment gave $9 of the $13 million to build the then new downtown tennis facility, which is first class. And in fact, other than the basketball arena, it was the second sports venue downtown Indianapolis.
Well, first of all, I think it's amazing that it cost, would you just say $13 million?
$13 million, exactly. Can you imagine today?
That'd be amazing.
It's a great point. We build this thing, and it seems like the tournaments kind of go into hell in a handbasket. Fewer people every year, less successful. You played college tennis. What would you do? And so I shot off my big mouth and said, I think it's clear you got to do these things. And he said, that makes a lot of sense. Can you write it up? And I said, yeah. And so 2 pages or whatever the next day. And then he went to see the mayor, whose campaign I had managed, and said, we'd like Mark to do this. So I became the president of the committee, a host committee, an organizing committee like Indianapolis always has, for the tournament in 1985, where I'm getting paid to run the Pan Am Games. But it was honestly because of the model of the way the Sports Corp organizes events, which we could talk more about if you wish. I found it clear what we needed to do and pretty easy to motivate the sports and the business community to turn things around. So in its first year, it made enormous progress. And early on, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 years, it became, every year it was voted for a long time as the players' favorite tournament on the circuit. And in that context, I met everybody in men's tennis at a time when its governance was being completely blown up and restructured, led by the players and the Player Association.
Yep.
And so for 2 years, the people who were reorganizing tennis, whom I got to know, came to me and said, we'd love for you to come run this. And I said, no, I'm an Indianapolis guy. I want to be here. At that time, the games were over and I was working for Eli Lilly in public or governmental affairs and family. And this was always home. And not in some sentimental sense. I just loved what you could do in Indianapolis.
Right.
And then we went to one day to the children's bookstore at 56th in Illinois to buy a birthday present for one of our little kids to give to the birthday friend. And I see the book of The Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. And, you can read it in 3 minutes. And
Right.
I read the book, and my wife was with me. I said, honey, I'm going to have to take this job because it's all about the journey.
Right.
And how one way to look at life is not through careful planning, but by kind of seeing forks in the road and taking one and taking risks and not being afraid of the unknown. So at that point in my life, I was, 37, and I'd never had a job for more than 3 years because campaigns are usually 1.
Right.
Pan Am Games was 3. And so, we left. I didn't drop my membership at the Columbia Club or Woodstock. I became a non-resident member of those things because thinking I'd be back.
Right.
And then 15 years later, we did come back.
That's amazing. So I love these connection points, right? So you volunteer some information to Jim Morris, right, about your opinion of this tennis tournament. And then you take over, and then you ultimately get asked to run ATP, right? It's like we're one dot connects to another. There's so many doors in life, right? And if we don't poke our nose through each one and kind of see what's on the other side, sometimes we decide not to walk through, but then sometimes those doors are wide open. And
I don't know how it sounds. It's just the truth. I don't care how it sounds.
Yeah.
I think I've interviewed for one job in my life. These things just happened. The doors were just there and opened. And I wasn't, it's fair to say I might have been the last one to know it on more than one occasion. That I wasn't involved in the tournament to get a job in tennis.
Right, exactly. You were just thinking that.
Yeah. And a lot of my life and a lot of opportunities have come around that way. Most of it, really.
So when you were running the ATP, that was probably a time frame where like the NBA, NFL, like all these other professional leagues are really coming into their own, like TV rights are starting to happen. And I think you renegotiated or reorganized the prize packages as well. Is that right?
All that
stuff. What were kind of behind the scenes? Are there one or two things that pop out that you're like, we have to really rethink this one component? And like, it just felt like the weight of the world, like, how are we actually going to get there? And how'd you break through?
It's a really good question that became a central question to our time in the game, in the sport. Tennis is global.
Mm-hmm.
So like the ATP Tour has the same role as the PGA Tour. It's got the rules, the schedule, prize money, marketing, promotion, television rights, everything but the Grand Slams, which are like the majors in golf, except the ATP was worldwide. And the PGA Tour is basically U.S. or North America. So it was very broad. It was a sport where, every country in the world, their number one player might be 75 in the world, but he's probably known in Ecuador.
Right.
So you had a lot of breadth, but a micron deep in terms of market penetration. And it was not modern in terms of the way that it went to the market. So when I started, there were no rules about how the television rights would be sold to the market, and they were sold by every individual tournament. So you couldn't put packages together, right? Everything was fragmented.
Right.
Whether it was a prospective sponsor or a broadcaster, they could cherry pick and take the pieces they wanted, and that's just not the way we know modern rights are marketed. So how do you fix the fragmentation? The other thing was people didn't know what to watch when. 4 Grand Slams are the majors. Every other event looks like the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's too many over the course of a whole year without any kind of structure to the competition. So there's a rights fragmentation issue and the structure issue. So we spent 2 or 3 years, really persuading the tennis world and the marketplace that we needed to solve those problems. So the other thing is, in addition to each tournament having their own TV rights, they had all their own sponsorship rights. So how do you put together enough sponsorship in a package for a sponsor to promote the game instead of just an individual tournament?
Right.
So we've almost turned into investment bankers, and we ended up doing $1 billion deal with a big sports marketing agency. So we could go to the top events in the world and buy all their rights back. I couldn't just condemn them and take them. So negotiating all that with the funds at hand was a huge project. And I'm completely convinced that the structural changes we made and are still more or less in place today were the right thing to do. But the agency that we did the deal with had decided to go public. And so they were out buying all kinds of rights in South American football and you name it. And basically they lost control of their company and went bankrupt. So here we are with this guarantee of money coming in with a soon-to-be bankrupt company. The good news is we had a letter of credit, and when they did hit the wall, we collected a few $100 million, and we could buy the time to work through it.
Yeah.
But the message in all that was to think outside the box about what's necessary for growth, and then go after it and figure out how to put it together. And then it never goes the way you want.
Right.
I don't know that was really entrepreneurial.
I think it's very entrepreneurial.
Well,
right?
in any other entrepreneurial setting, you just got to be able to pivot.
Because it's easy to sit here now and look backwards and like, well, of course that made sense. But the story behind the story, right? With a company going bankrupt and having to figure out a pivot to finance around that and buy yourself the time.
And this was like a lot of sports leagues.
Right.
Very political. You've got all these stakeholders and different perspectives.
Yeah. And
so, it's not like everybody was going, well, that's a great idea. You took a lot of persuading and incentives.
So the tournament that used to come through here, because that doesn't come here anymore, right?
Correct.
Was that the RCA? Is it
at one point it was the RCA Championships.
Do you think that we could ever get a tournament back, or do we have to have a facility?
Well, for sure you got to have a facility. Right? I mean, one here could try to get an indoor event. I think, could we ever get one back? Ever's a long time, but there's more supply in the world, and it's a world circuit, a world's calendar and schedule, than there are good weeks to play in.
Right.
Maybe it's something like the Davis Cup competition or some more of a one-off event, but to have a perennial annual event in Indy is tough. And I have to say, the competition's tough. People who are tennis fans in Indy will know Cincinnati's invested zillions of dollars, unbelievable facility, great event, and the same is true in Canada. So it's a tough haul.
That's fascinating. Then you worked on the Super Bowl.
I did.
And one of the stories I love about the Super Bowl is, as I recall, this I might be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so. It was here in 2012.
Yeah,
and I think originally it was going to be in 11, but something happened with Dallas. So somehow we swapped. They ended up having a massive snowstorm in 11, and we had like 60-degree weather in 2012.
The best person to tell this history is Mitch Daniels, who was as governor, advocate for the whole initiative. It's not quite the way you remember it now, but I was not involved. Mayor Peterson was mayor, and he chose Fred Glass to chair the initiative to try to get it for 2011. They did a superb job. We should have gotten it. But at the last minute in the bidding process, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, who were bidding against Indy or vice versa, just dumped a ton of money on the table for the NFL because they had so many new suites in their building. They could say, the league can have all this, which we couldn't compete with. And that was at the last minute. So we lose. We didn't swap. We didn't get it.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
But then we got it for the next year, which ended up being for 2012. And I remember with Mitch being down in Dallas, this is going to sound very petty, but they just had the worst luck. There was a taxi strike, so if you flew into the airport, good luck.
Uber didn't exist yet.
Uber, I don't think it did. Ice everywhere.
Right.
Falling
off the roof.
Sliding off the roof of the now AT&T Stadium. Actually, some people were killed. It took out entrances. It was horrible, right? Nobody deserves that luck. But they got it and we didn't. And the next year, what do we have? 60-degree weather.
Right. Just incredible. We had zip lines running down the road and all kinds of fun stuff.
It was fun. It worked out really well.
I'm Mayor Chris Jensen. The companies shaping tomorrow aren't waiting for opportunity. They're choosing environments built for performance. In Noblesville, Innovation Mile connects talent, infrastructure, and innovation leaders in a community designed for growth. Because where you build matters. See why forward-thinking companies are choosing Noblesville at choosenoblesville.com/innovate. Noblesville, all about you.
So what do you think is so special? So going back to the Sports Corp, let's pause here for a second and go deeper on like the Sports Corp, the Super Bowl. So I think we were the first state or city to establish a sports commission, and that was like back in 1979. And then we had leaders sitting around a table like, what can we be when we grow up someday? And let's go after this like sports capital, amateur sports capital concept. And by all measures, as a city, we've kind of crushed it.
Yeah.
And it still persists today. And, getting 38,000 volunteers for the Pan Am Games, this just doesn't happen in other markets. What is unique? What is special about our recipe, our ingredients that we have that enables this to happen?
Well, there's a lot. One of the things I've always loved about Indy, and this is not central to the answer, but I'll say it anyway. I've always said it's big enough to be meaningful and make a difference, but small enough to get things done.
Yep.
So Indianapolis has always had a great ability to get everybody on the same page for some big initiative like this, whereas, there have been plenty of other cities that look like they have more resources, should have more advantage, and just can't pull stuff off because they can't get everybody aligned.
Yeah.
We've never had that problem around sports. I think early on, most of the sports corps are at least quasi-governmental. This was private, not for profit. It was created and led by brilliant civic people. As much as it's always needed and relied on elected officials' help, they were partners and cheerleaders. The actual doing of it was always the civic community more. Early on, I was around then. I was sort of the younger brother. Peter Ueberroth and the LA Olympics in 1984 invented a model where they had sports commissioners, somebody in charge of each of the sports in their Summer Olympic Games. And the people who were the sports commissioners were the most successful business people in Southern Cal. And he didn't pay them a penny. They did it to be part of something. And so we just sort of took that model and blew it up to another level. And, the leadership there's so few paid people to do those things, but the quality of the volunteer, and I call them volunteer management. Thank goodness for the people who are volunteers who will stand in the parking lot and park cars and take tickets. But the actual management that you would think you would have to hire was inevitably very talented people that were very successful here or quickly, moving up their corporate ladder. And they helped, they always led. And they were people you couldn't hire.
Right.
There's no way they're leaving what they're doing to do this, but they'd find the time to really add value. So from the very beginning, we had this volunteer-driven model. We used that to be inclusive when nobody knew what that word meant. So I remember for the Pan Am Games, we had divisions, and divisions were groups of committees by function for whatever had to happen. And I'm going to make this up because I don't remember. Let's just say there were 25 divisions. So, a couple hundred maybe committees. For each division, you didn't have a division chair. You had co-chairs, and almost all of them were 3 co-chairs. If you went to the Harvard Business School and said, how's that look? They go, oh, it's ridiculous. Nobody's in charge. Right. You have redundancy. And what we wanted, first of all, was going to be years from the beginning of the planning till doing it. Some people would get transferred to another place or whatever. But also, more importantly, we saw it as a chance to bring people at that level of the community in that didn't even know each other.
Right.
So men, women, black, white, Hispanic, those division co-chairs were very intentionally a diverse group. And I think that served the community well as a model, but also because some of those people stayed involved for many, many years. It's at the leadership level, volunteerism, which gave us access to enormous talent. And then I can't remember the number. I think, 38,000 for the Pan Am Games. We had 12,000 for the Super Bowl. We can only use 8 people who just want to be part of it. And I think that's part of the DNA back to really the late 70s and early 80s.
This is making me think about that book, Good to Great. And I can't remember the author, but he went out and wanted to figure out in this certain time frame, all these public companies, like who is the best performing of all time and why.
Yeah.
And Tractor Supply was in that period of time he looked at. And he couldn't come up with any kind of anecdotal, data-driven answer. And all he could figure out at the end was, laying in bed one night, was like, you know what? All of those leaders were not arrogant. And they gave the credit away. And what you're describing there is teamwork and bringing different folks together, right, after a common mission. And that's how magic happens. If we just
magical.
Yeah, lay the egos at the door and we just all pile in and do this thing together.
And it works for us, but it's really a special sauce. When we're talking to Commissioner Goodell and his people, and we said, we'll have as many volunteers as we need. And he said, well, what if it's 10,000? We said, well, we can get 10,000 volunteers. And they didn't even believe us, right? I mean, they go, what are you going to really do? Because what are you going to do when it's game day and we don't have them? And, and then we couldn't even put everybody to work that wanted to be part of it. It's a very special culture.
So after the Super Bowl, you get one of the greatest gigs of all time. Yeah, you go to work with the Hallman family, and then ultimately, right, you're CEO of Penske Entertainment. How did that come about?
Honestly, it's another example where it was the furthest thing from my mind. In fact, when my wife and I moved back to Indy from 15 years in tennis outside Indy, we talked a lot about what are we going to do with our community time. And the only thing we could decide in the 13-hour drive north was not sports. I'd never seen myself as a sports career, even though at that point I'd been doing it a while. And so I had met exactly one time Greg Ballard, who was running for mayor, and had a 45-minute lunch at a cafeteria relationship with him, and he gets elected. And as mayor-elect, he calls me, and he says, I didn't really campaign as an advocate for the Super Bowl. His predecessor and opponent had been for it, so it was easy to be against it. He said, but, now I'm mayor, and I'm thinking about it, I think we ought to go after it. And when I think about the Super Bowl, this is a quote, when I think about the Super Bowl, I see your face, end quote. I went, come on. So he said, I'd like you to think about chairing it. And it's hard to say no. It was not because I was just thrilled at the idea, because that was going to be like a 5-year thing from the time we would go after getting it.
Yep.
And then the 4 years of having been selected. So, I didn't know if that was going to make sense, but I said, I'll at least do the bid. And then we got the bid, and then it was hard to quit. And it was a phenomenal experience, again, just to be part of something that just gelled. So many people wanted to be part of it. We didn't care about the game. I mean, it had to be well put together, but that's the NFL's job. We cared about the impact on people and communities, like the Legacy Project that became a big part of it. And it was a fabulous experience. I'm very glad I did.
So you've been the CEO of Penske Entertainment now for 5 years?
Oh, I
6
didn't
years?
answer your question. You asked about
It's
racing.
all good.
So I'm doing that. I'm sorry for the diversion.
Yeah.
And it's over. And I was asked to go on the board of the Holman George family-owned company, along with Jim Morris and some fabulous people. And so I'm an outside director, not working there. And the Super Bowl ends, and I like to say I was knee deep in a bucket of pina coladas in the Dominican Republic after the Super Bowl, and the phone rings, and the director said, why don't you come work here? I knew something about big events at that point in my life, and I knew something about leagues. And it's the same things, but in different environments with different specifics. But I didn't know anything about racing. I grew up here knowing that it was cool to be at the track. But I said yes, and that was beginning of 2013. And this is a few years later. Time
so
flies.
Amazing. So the greatest spectacle on earth. And when I've done some delegation trips around the world, two things people know all over the globe, and that's Peyton Manning and Indy 500.
Manning would be glad to hear it.
So, and now the world's moving faster than ever, right? This whole digital world. And the one thing I love with all the impact of AI and modern technology, I've been talking with folks about this for the last year or two. AI can't replace a physical event, like a game, tennis, basketball, hockey, whatever it is, and racing. Like you actually have to go physically run the race. And there's been a big push where a lot of league owners and all the different sports are doing these villages kind of around their stadiums, et cetera. I don't know how many acres the track is, but I know the straightaway is a mile long.
Almost, yeah.
And you have roughly 1,000 acres. What are the kinds of things that you all are thinking about in terms of, in a world where everybody's buried in their social apps and has an attention span of about 3 seconds? What are some of the things that you're thinking about with the Indy 500 and the league in general?
Yeah. Let me broaden the question a little bit, because you're asking about it actually, not virtually. But I think any marketer, at least of a sport, also thinks about the marketing of the sport, not sort of virtually and in terms of fandom,
yep,
as much as physically and at a site. So the growth of a sport depends, the number of fans and fan engagement depends on them being a community and relating to each other. It's not just watching Alex Palou win another race. It's relating to and arguing with and all the dynamics of engagement of fans and the fans of a sport around the sport. So in that sense, community is critically important. You asked, though, about it physically. And, there's no better example than the snake pit. That's when we were kids, it was organic, meaning you just went out to the first turn and got in trouble. Here, it's fenced in and it's organized and hopefully safe and great talent and the special ticket. And the snake pit crowd is a community in a very physical and cultural sense. But there's lots of examples. Roger had this idea, Roger Penske. We have these mounds in the infield, in the at least 3 of the corners of the track, and there's of course fences in front of that. You can't have a car coming up there. So he said, well, we ought to put televisions on these fences in front of these mounds. So it's just a little, not inexpensive example of now every, whatever it is, 30 feet, there's a TV in front of a general admission place on the grass on a mound, because it begins to feel like a place, like a community. And same people are hurrying to get the same place year after year, even if it's not reserved. And there's just lots of examples where the way you approach it is the experience for the fan. And a big piece of that is it's almost never their individual experience. It's your parking space and your route in and all of that. But the home run is when it's a communal experience. It's part of being a community. And then eventually the special sauce at this track is that experience is passed on from generation to generation, which is golden.
There's stories out there, and I'm curious, I'm sure they're true, like if there's other examples. So you have the greatest spectacle on earth. Like, it's known globally. It's absolutely amazing. I'm getting chills here just thinking about it. The sound of the cars, the people, the fan engagement, et cetera. And you're describing these knolls, the hills, right? And a lot of families go there. You're describing Snake Pit and the legacy of Snake Pit. But then also down to, are the restrooms painted? And it's like the attention to detail, right? For that experience. Can you talk about that? Like the importance of even on the grandiose scale, the details matter.
I would start by saying I didn't fully understand that. I mean, I thought about it operationally, but not for each individual and what they saw and felt and what they felt about what they saw and experienced. Yeah. So that's what Roger Penske means when he talks about fan experience. And it does start with your physical space. So, yeah, there are stories. I'll try to tell you one quickly about the restrooms, because we have these cinder block buildings that have the troughs that at least every male who's been out there knows about. and they'd never been painted. And I remember we'd signed the deal, but it hadn't closed, so he didn't really own the place yet. And we're spending hour after hour looking at every nook and cranny. And it became kind of an initial focus on the restrooms. And so we'd go in the same one kind of outside the admin building in turn one. And one day he said, well, let's see if we can get the painters to come in this afternoon. And, there's cinder blocks. So maybe they could take a kind of real dark gray, almost a black, and do the bottom row of block. And then maybe the next 2 block rows could be kind of a lighter gray and then kind of a white above that. You don't have to do the whole building. Let's just do a wall here and see how it looks, and let's look at it tomorrow. So we go back tomorrow, and, that looks really good. But what if the bottom 2 blocks were the darker color, and then one? And so before you know it, I've been in the same restroom with him at least 25 times. And we have looked at every fixture, everything you can think of. And it's amazing. He loves to look at something, if it's physical, until it's just right.
Yeah.
And it's in the weeds for details. And he calls that, I like to mock it up.
Yep.
And we do it until we know we got it.
Yeah.
So I got him a hat that said mock it up at one point. So I think we're near the end of this process in that one restroom. And we got guys, there's probably 5 or 6 of us in there, and he's got guys just moving a mirror that's this big. There's going to be one on each side of the sink. So we're watching the guys move the mirror a quarter of an inch. And I kind of roll my eyes. And he took my arm and he said, I know, Mark, I'm sorry. I can't help it. I can't do it any other way. I just have to see it until I know it's right, and then it's right. And he said, take the boat, for instance. He was way into building the most amazing yacht. I think it's unimaginable. And it was in the Netherlands where it was being built, and the hulls and the mechanicals and everything was done. Now it's time to start deciding on the details of the finishings and the decor inside. He said they send me a blueprint that's about that big for a whole salon. And like a end table is that big on this blueprint. He said, what am I going to do with that?
Right.
So he flies over, and they rent a very significant clear span warehouse, and they mock up every stitch of anything that's going to be inside this boat in styrofoam to scale. So you can walk between this chair,
that's amazing,
and that table,
right,
and feel the height and the space. And you better believe what was built initially wasn't the final version.
Right.
I mean, it's unbelievable. The guy is running this enormous business empire, but will make time to think about every detail. And it's only one of them, but it's one key reason that he's so enormously successful. His attention to detail is unprecedented for me.
That's amazing. I love it. We could sit here and talk about this stuff all day. I'm fascinated. My biggest takeaway so far is mock it up, right? As we're thinking about our businesses and our futures. But we're going to move into the rapid fire questions. We've got just a few rapid fire questions.
Seatbelt for this?
We're going to go fast. We're going to do like Indy 500 style.
Okay.
But it can be one word or, whatever, multiple sentences. I'm always fascinated what the responses to these, right? So it's pretty wild thoughts that I've loved every single answer, and yours are going to be no different. But what is one thing in your industry that you think people should stop doing? And it could be, in your situation, any industry.
This is easy for this one.
Yeah.
Quit looking in the rearview mirror. We have so many fabulous hardcore fans, and their frame of reference is often how it used to be.
Yep.
And it's like, I don't even want to know what it used to be. I want to know what we're going to do. So let's quit looking backwards.
I love that. What is one thing that you think leads to the best ability to disrupt ourselves?
I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm just not a rule follower. When I'm faced with a choice that I don't love, or you're thinking about an expense, you just always want to say, how could we do this different? What's another approach? So don't tell me it's this or that.
Yep.
We're going to come up with 5 other ways that we might slice it and come up with hopefully a better way. So just kind of never accept the status quo on big things and little things.
I love it. It's just the last question. If there's one thing, if you could wave a magic wand, if there's one thing in the world that you could solve with innovation, what would it be?
Well, that's a tough one, but one would, and it's happening slowly, is to create truth in everything digital. So I don't have to worry about whether that AI photo is real or not, whether it's real news or fake news. And obviously there are platforms that are beginning to address that, but I don't think they're there yet. So if it was just clear, there's no clarity around truth generally, but at least in terms of, kind of the fake news, BS, created photos and the like, I wish technology would just fix that yesterday.
I love it. Mark, this has been an awesome time together. Thank you very much for sharing your journey. And for all those out there, remember to mock it up.
Yeah. It'll save you money, even if it's more expensive in the front end, but you won't be redoing it so much later, and you'll get it right.
I love it. All right. Until next time, we'll see you soon on Innovate or Evaporate.
This episode was brought to you by Rally, the Global Cross-Sector Innovation Conference. Learn more at rallyinnovation.com.